Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We're now in our second season, and we're just more excited than ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on groundwater pollution, conservation, and reclamation. Water is unequivocally the cornerstone of life. Without it, we simply die. Clean, fresh water is a limited resource. And with all the severe droughts happening in the world, the limited supply of fresh water is becoming one of our most precious resources. Also, water is a renewable resource. We all know about the water cycle, where water on Earth gets circulated and recycled naturally by being drawn into the plants and the rain and all of that. So, why is it then that it's so important for us to conserve water if it gets naturally recycled? And why are there places like California that keep on suffering from severe water shortages? Water is such an important substance for preserving life that scientists looking for evidence of life on other planets regard the presence of water as a vital clue. In developed nations, we tend to take water for granted because it flows easily out of the tap, when actually over 50% of the United States population depends on groundwater for drinking. And groundwater also is one of our most important sources for water irrigation. Unfortunately, groundwater is susceptible to pollutants. In fact, a study of groundwater quality of the principal aquifers in the United States conducted way back in 1991 and 2004 showed that 23% of domestic wells had contaminants at levels greater than human health benchmarks. But hopefully things have changed for the better now. And here today to help us explore and understand all of this more are two very knowledgeable experts from different segments of the whole spectrum of the water industry, and we're very excited to talk with them and have them make us smarter about all of this. Today we have with us Jennifer Clary with Clean Water Action and Denise Hickey with the North Texas Municipal Water District. As I said, Jennifer is with the Clean Water Action, and they are a nonprofit environmental organization that was founded during the campaign to pass the landmark Clean Water Act in 1972. Clean Water Action organization has worked to win strong health and environmental protections by bringing issue expertise, solution-oriented thinking, and people power to the table. Their goal is to take action to protect drinking water and clean up polluted waterways. And they do this by getting health-harming toxics out of everyday products, by protecting our water from dirty energy threats, including drilling and fracking for oil and gas, as well as power plant pollution, and by seeking to build a future of clean water and clean energy, and by keeping our clean water laws strong and effective in order to protect water and health. Jennifer is the California Director for Clean Water Action, and she was previously served as a water program manager in California, and she is a noted water policy expert with particular expertise in safe drinking water access and groundwater sustainability. Welcome, Jennifer. We're so glad to have you, and did I get all of that right?
I hope so, because I wouldn't want to repeat it.
Okay. And our other guest, as I mentioned, is Denise Hickey. Denise is the Water Resource Program and Public Education Manager for the North Texas Municipal Water District. The North Texas Municipal Water District is a regional wholesale provider of water services for residents in the 10 counties that constitute the North Texas region, and that also includes two of the fastest growing cities in the country. That's Frisco, Texas, and Plano, Texas. Their service territory covers 2,200 square miles. And in addition to water treatment and delivery, the North Texas Municipal Water District also provides regional wastewater treatment and solid waste disposal services. It is a conservation and reclamation district as well as a political subdivision of the state of Texas. Now, as a regional water management partnership that services large as well as small communities that are not serviced by the City of Dallas and the City of Fort Worth water programs. And as a result, it streamlines the service delivery by acting regionally rather than by the individual city or county having to do that work. Its work involves building, they build lakes and reservoirs, maintaining, protecting, and storing, as well as conserving regional water supplies. They also treat and deliver clean drinking water. They collect, treat, and dispose trash, sewage, and other waste, as well as, most importantly for the growing North Texas region, they have a charge to plan for future regional water services needs. And Denise has been with the Water District for over 25 years, and as I said, she oversees the water conservation, education, and outreach initiatives that focus primarily on changing consumer water use habits to more efficient behaviors, and her work brings higher consumer awareness to the services of the Water Management District as they provide for water, wastewater, solid waste, and water reuse. Denise is also an active participant in the state's Water Conservation Advisory Council, a member of the American Waterworks Association, and a member of the Water Environment Federation. Welcome, Denise. So let's get started, and I want to begin with Jennifer. And let's begin, Jennifer, by explaining to people exactly what is groundwater as compared to our drinking water. How do they interact and intersect? And as compared to the water also that we use in our homes to bathe, wash, and cook with. And why is it important? And how does Clean Water Action Organization do its work to protect it?
So groundwater is often your drinking water, and the difference between groundwater and surface water is sometimes the way it's regulated or treated, or the way it's extracted, or what kind of contaminants might be in it. But essentially, groundwater is water that's infiltrated into the ground over the centuries. And underground, it's not like a giant lake. It's more like a giant sponge, because the water exists between particles of soil or rock. And depending on the kind of soil you have, you can store more or less water. And so groundwater is really important in places like Texas and California, where we have severe dry spells. And groundwater is your buffer. When rains don't fall, surface waters disappear pretty rapidly. And groundwater is what makes sure that you have a year-round supply. So during droughts, late summer, if streams are still running, because groundwater helps you keep streams running and helps keep the temperature cold, helps the fish continue to run. Clean Water has, for a long time, worked on source water protection, which is the best way to have clean drinking water, is to make sure it doesn't get dirty in the first place. And so we work on trying to ensure that potential contaminating activities don't interfere with the ability to have clean water that requires minimal treatment.
Surface water is streams, lakes, and ponds.
Yes.
And groundwater is the water underground that we don't typically see.
That's correct.
Got it. And I want to talk a lot about pollution, but let me first ask Denise, because she is with the Water Management District. What is y'all's use, the Water Management District, between surface and groundwater, and how do they interact and intersect for you all as a municipal water provider? And we just have a couple of minutes before we're going to go to break.
Bernice, we have the North Texas Municipal Water District uses surface supplies. All of our water is above ground. And back before our creation, the original member cities, they used groundwater supplies, wells. And with the growth in the North Texas area, the leaders realized that they needed to have an alternate supply. And while the Corps of Engineers was constructing Lake Lavon for flood control. The group of foresighted individuals went to the state of Texas and wanted to utilize the water supply that was being stored in Lavon for flood control as a water supply for municipal purposes. So all of our supplies are now surface water supplies.
And you had to build these, right? Because Lake Lavon was a lake that was man-made, and so you all have continued to do that to provide the water that you do at the water district, correct?
That's correct. While the district did not construct Lavon, it was constructed by the Corps of Engineers. We do have a right to use that water that is stored. We are currently building a Bodark Lake, which is in Fannin County, that the district is constructing itself. But yes, we actually use the water supply that has been stored in several Corps of Engineer reservoirs.
Let's go to break, and after we come back from the break, I want to ask you how that compares to the big municipalities, City of Dallas and City of Fort Worth's water sources. We'll be right back on the other side of the break with Jennifer Clary from Clean Action Organization and Denise Hickey with the North Texas Municipal Water District. Thank you, ladies. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the green, healthy, and sustainable living authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, Natural Grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many other locations, as well as available online free for download at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to our show today on water conservation, reclamation, and groundwater, and what it's all about and what it means to you. Now, before we went to the break, Denise, you were telling us about how the North Texas Municipal Water District acquires the water it uses from these man-made lakes. And so my question that came to mind is, where do the City of Dallas and the City of Fort Worth, which are big, I'm sure there are others, but those are probably the large other water districts in our area, where does their water come from?
You're correct that City of Dallas and Fort Worth are very large water providers and users in North Texas, and they as well use surface water supplies. In the North Texas area, you will find that the majority of the water providers and the cities no longer are using wells as their primary water source because it doesn't replenish in quantities enough to provide the water supply needed for such a large population. So the North Texas area relies on surface water supplies, the lakes, the rivers and streams that flow into those lakes, and then in addition, we use a wetland as well.
Interesting. I want to go back to Jennifer now as we talk more about pollution on our waters. And particularly, I want to talk about groundwater pollution. How does groundwater become polluted? What are the impacts? And why should people care about this?
Well, groundwater can be polluted in a bunch of different ways, but basically you have natural and man-made pollutants. And a lot of groundwater is naturally polluted with things like manganese, iron, arsenic, heavy metals, and those can be treated, but it can be expensive. And particularly shallow wells can be contaminated with man-made contaminants, primarily nitrate, which is a very common, probably the most common man-made contaminant, mostly a result of agriculture, dairy, and human activity. And also, if you have a shallow well, it can be contaminated with bacteria. You also have chemical contaminants from industries, from fertilizers that can also cause groundwater plumes or widespread contamination. And those would be things like of old DDT, currently 1,2,3-trichloropropane, benzene, and other contaminants from oil and gas activities. You should always care because the more polluted your water is, the more expensive it is to treat it, and the more difficult it is to use it. So it always is best to avoid pollution when you can.
How is groundwater used? As Denise was just telling us, here in North Texas, looks like all of our water that we use is surface water. So how are people coming into contact with or intersection with the groundwater and thus the pollution?
So like California, Texas has a lot of people on private domestic wells. And one difficulty there is you often don't know how old the well is, what kind of condition it is, how it was made in the first place. It can be enormously susceptible to surface contamination, to things like coliform bacteria and nitrate. And because they're not commonly tested, that homeowner may not know that there's a problem with their well.
Is everyone on a well, it's an individually owned private well? Is there such an animal or occurrence as people, depending on a well, and they don't really know it, or they don't know where the well is or anything like that?
I think if you're on a private well, you generally know where it is. It's on your property. But it's true that a lot of people don't understand where their water comes from. If you asked one of Denise's customers where their water comes from, chances are they might know the lake if they recreate on the lake, or they might say the faucet. I think it's often a problem that people don't understand where their water comes from, and that makes it more difficult to really teach people to treat their water right, that everything you do on the surface can impact their water quality, either through infiltrating the groundwater or running off the surface water.
And I want to come back for just a moment before we leave it. But I want to make it really clear to people how their lives come in contact with the groundwater and thus this pollution. And talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think people may not understand that even if they're not themselves reliant on groundwater. Likely the crops, the food that they eat, is sourced from groundwater. Groundwater is a major source of agriculture in the United States, both in places like California, the Midwest, which has the huge Ogallala aquifer. So you should think about your food and how it comes into contact with groundwater, and you should consider how groundwater impacts people in your community that you may not know in ways that you don't understand.
I know it's a big deal here, as I suspect it is in California and many, many other places, is to eat locally. You know, farmers markets are proliferating all over the place, and there's a lot of moves on to eat food within 100 miles of where you live. In fact, that is a requirement of a number of our, quote, purist farmers markets around here, is that the farmers who are vendors there can only bring in food that's been grown within 100 miles of the location. And this big push to eat locally and to eat naturally. And so that is a great point you bring forth, is that all this local natural eating is exposed to groundwater and whatever is in it. And so what would you say are probably the top common groundwater pollutants that we are coming in contact with via primarily our food?
Well, I think the most common groundwater contaminant is nitrate, which is actually a benefit for your food because it's the key ingredient in the fertilizer. That's the number one contaminant in most areas. But you also have industrial contaminants, some of which don't impact your food and some of which can be picked up by the root system. So I think that there's not always a direct contact because we don't always monitor a lot of contaminants or look at how they might impact your food. Also, if your food is close to the ground, then it's also like if you're eating potatoes or peppers, things close to the ground, that's also more likely to have contaminants or pesticides.
And so who are the biggest perpetrators of this pollution?
I would say agriculture, just simply because nitrogen is required to grow food. And it's been, a lot of farmers have been trained that if a little nitrogen helps, a little more helps more. So crops are largely over-fertilized. But then you also have pesticides. And often it's not the active ingredient in the pesticide, but pesticide ingredients that create huge problems with contamination. And we have problems with it. For instance, as I mentioned, 1,2,3-trichloropropane, which was an inactive ingredient in a pesticide used banned 20 years ago, and it's ubiquitous in groundwater in California. And I'm not sure how heavily it was used here in North Texas, but it's just one example.
One that we have, I don't know if you all do fracking in California as well,
Yes.
but certainly I have to think that that causes some groundwater pollution.
Yes, it does. It's a little more limited because of where our oil and gas exploration takes place. So yes, we do have some. I would say that agriculture, because it covers more land area, is probably a greater impact on groundwater quality.
And that's in California, but that may be different here in Texas.
Could be different, yeah, absolutely. And then you have to think about where your waste oil is going. So in California, I don't know if you have them out here. In California, they have these huge wastewater pits where oil and gas wastewater is just put out in open pits, and it percolates underground into the groundwater.
I don't know what they do with the water that they do here. Do you know, Denise, what they do? She doesn't know either.
I don't know. Fortunately for the North Texas Municipal Water District, our service area, we do not have any fracking in the area. In Texas, it's west of Interstate 35. So we've not had to deal with that, so I'm not well versed in that area of fracking.
And I read a lot about it, and that is the issue that always comes forth, Jennifer, is what do they do with that extract water? Just one more thing on groundwater before we have to go to break, and that is, how does groundwater and groundwater pollution affect surface water? Let's start with you on that, Jennifer, and then we'll have Denise weigh in.
It's usually the other way around. Surface water affects groundwater. I think one question is if you're extracting groundwater for use, they have different constituents. And if you're using that, for instance, in direct potable reuse and putting it into your reservoir, you have to be conscious of how your pollutants interact.
Thank you. Denise, you want to?
Yeah, the North Texas Water District, we do have an indirect reuse program, the East Fork of the Trinity River, and we have constructed a man-made wetland, and we utilize plants to actually intake. They use those pollutants and those elements. They intake those out of the water, the river water that's been pumped into the wetland, to clean that water itself. So we are removing those contaminants that Jennifer talked about through the process of using plants. Then we do pipe that back up to Lavon to augment our treated water supplies, where then it's treated again at our water treatment plant.
Thank you. And we're going to talk a lot more about that towards the end of the program on reclamation. But you all do it in an intentional and deliberate way.
That is correct.
Right.
Since we do have wastewater treatment plants, we know the quantity that's being discharged into the river. We do water quality tests there at the wetlands to see exactly what are the contaminants and at what quantities, how well are our plants doing. And we also have to monitor the growth of those plants and ensure that they are, growing in populations enough to treat the water naturally.
Indeed. And we're going to go to break, but after the break, I still have one more question on groundwater and the intersection of surface water. But we're going to go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side to continue this very interesting conversation with these two experts. Thank you, ladies. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on groundwater pollution, conservation, and reclamation. And we're here with two very smart ladies on various aspects of water conservation and water usage. And they come to us from very different spheres of the industry, which we feel makes us really smart today from learning all that they have to say. We've got Jennifer Clary with Clean Water Action Organization and Denise Hickey with the North Texas Municipal Water District. Welcome again, ladies, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Before the break, both of you all had weighed in on the intersection between groundwater and surface water. And I remember, Denise, you all at the Water District do it in an intentional basis. But my question that comes to my mind for both or either of you is there ever an unintentional mix of the two? For example, I know that groundwater is the water in the ground that's below the surface and it does things. And then surface water is, say, maybe from the lakes, man-made here in North Texas, what have you. Would you ever have an occasion where groundwater is seeping up into the lake along with its pollutants? Is there incidents of perhaps unintentional seepage or merging of the two?
In my experience, it's more common the other way around, where pollutants are carried by surface water and infiltrated into groundwater.
Okay.
And I would agree with that, Jennifer. I think, it's really important that as a population, each individual needs to realize that their actions can affect the environment in a negative manner, whether you're on surface water or you're on groundwater supplies, because everything relies on water. Groundwater, the purest groundwater for your plants, your crops, your trees. You need to have really good, clean groundwater without pollutants, as well as on the surface water. You need to have the cleanest water possible for water treatment. So I think it works hand in hand regardless, because we as individuals in our communities need to take ownership and be stewards of water quality for everyone and everything that relies on water, whether it's ground or surface water supplies.
Indeed. So when people put pesticides and insecticides and whatever other kind of sides on their lawns?
Yes, that is one of the largest overuse of products there is. In agriculture, our large farmers know what the ratio is per acre. And citizens have that mentality, unfortunately, that the more you put on it, the better it's going to be. And most individuals will want to apply that before a rainfall. And what we find is in overabundance or overapplication, then those pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers then go down into our storm drain untreated, go down into our rivers and streams, can contaminate and or in higher quantities kill or have a detriment to the water quality and the life of the water and organisms, and actually can do a large damage to the river or the stream that it's going into. And then it may flow into Lake Lavon, which is our treated drinking water. So the district has a nationally certified lab where we test the raw water before, during, and after treatment. But some of those elements that they're testing for are some of those pollutants that Jennifer had mentioned earlier in this episode.
And Jennifer, you're on the coast with the ocean. If there's an oil spill or something else out there in the ocean, is there the potential for it to affect the groundwater and then perhaps the municipal water supplies in your area?
Generally speaking, no, because if you have that kind of contact with the ocean, your groundwater is too saline to drink. Remember that salt is a really important constituent for groundwater.
You know, there's water everywhere, all around us, of course. Seldom can we get in our cars and ride anywhere in most localities and not see some kind of waterway, you know, be it a creek, a stream, a lake, man-made or not, a pond or something. So why is it a growing drumbeat in many areas that we're running out of water? And how does the need to conserve water affect folks' day-to-day lives? And how does or can conservation measures affect them? And I want to start with you, Jennifer, because I know California is kind of a poster child.
Well, I think if you look, NASA has this satellite imagery that they do where they can actually measure groundwater levels around the world. And what they're showing is that groundwater is being mined, which means it's being extracted fast more quickly than it can be replenished. And groundwater stores a lot more water than any surface storage capacity. geography. So the Ogallala Aquifer, it would serve all of Texas for hundreds of years.
Where's that located?
Right under you, I believe, because it starts in North Texas.
It's actually further in the southwest Texas area. The aquifer we have here is the Woodbine Aquifer, and it's not quite as deep, and it's very much smaller than the Ogallala.
Ogallala goes up through all the Midwest states, I think as far north as South Dakota.
Oh,
and
okay.
we have something similar in the Central Valley in California, where we just have underground basins throughout the Central Valley serving about 8 million acres of agriculture. And so those basins are being overdrafted. It took millions of years to create those, tens of thousands actually, and they're being extracted in a few dozen years. And that means that that's a water supply that we won't be able to depend on in the future. And even if you don't drink from it, because I have to say, public water systems are really innovative and smart about maintaining, expanding, and diversifying their supplies. But think about where your crops are grown and where your food comes from, and that's where you should have concern.
And so that's where the groundwater is being overmined, as you say, is primarily in the agricultural districts or food growing areas.
Generally speaking, yes, every area is a food growing area, so yes.
And that's interesting. I lived in South Florida for a long time. And I know the first time that I heard them talk about water conservation and that we could run out of drinking water, my eyes just like, what are you talking about? There's water every way you turn here. So what's with that? These are the kinds of things that people don't understand. Denise, you want to go ahead and weigh in on that?
I think, too, you have to look at for the state of Texas, for individuals that use surface water supplies, all of that water belongs to the state of Texas. And so each water provider has to obtain a permit for a certain quantity of water for them to use. So regardless of whether you pass by the lakes, the rivers, the streams, your individual water provider may not have a right to use that surface water supply. So for the North Texas Municipal Water District, we have to meet the needs of a growing region, but we still have the certain bank of water, the certain quantity of water that we have to work within. So as we work with our cities, as those population growths increase and we look out over 50 years, we have to have a diverse water supply management strategy on what are our next water supplies and where are they coming from. A typical example is we use Lake Lavon. Well, very short downstream is White Rock Lake, and it's in Dallas, but it is not a North Texas Municipal Water District right to use water out of that supply.
Indeed. And Jennifer, what about you all in California? Like Florida, you got that big old ocean out there of unlimited water. So why do you have to worry about water conservation there?
Well, it's incredibly expensive and energy intensive to desalinate water. I mean, salt and water go together like lovers. I mean, it's hard to get them apart. And so it costs a lot of money. It's a lot cheaper to clean up your wastewater and reuse your wastewater. And so that's really what people are looking at. And also, that doesn't help you. 80% of the water used in California, it goes to agriculture because it really takes a lot of water to grow your lunch. And so you think, and so we might be able to work on that on the coast, but that's not going to, and there's a few desal plants going forward, and the cities are looking more and more at recycling their water.
As Jennifer mentioned, it's very costly to desalinate water. And the cheapest water that anyone has is the water that's already been developed through either a water right or the groundwater supply. So if you can use your existing supplies efficiently, then it is less costly than going out and building a desal plant or building another reservoir or another project to meet those water demands.
I want everybody to understand this because I know a lot of people don't, is that the water quantity is limited because we can't use all of that water that we see in the ocean because it's salt water. It would be very expensive to make that into drinking water, so you kind of have to take that off the table, and a lot of people don't understand that. So that's off the table. And the other aspect is the man-made sources of water or the other bodies of surface water that are used are finite. They're not endless. It's only so much of them. And they're only replenished when it rains or when they are reclaimed or reused. And we'll talk about that later. Thank you, ladies. We really appreciate your help with this, and we'll be right back on the other side of the break for our last segment. And we want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festivals, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV service. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, Natural Grocers, Central Markets, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available online free for download at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsors, Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on groundwater pollution, conservation, and reclamation. And we're back with two very smart ladies from different spheres of the water and the clean water industry, and they're really making us a lot smarter as it relates to all of this. We're back with Jennifer Clary with Clean Water Action Organization and Denise Hickey with the North Texas Municipal Water District. Now, just have two brief questions on conservation before we want to move on to reclamation. And that is, are there any statistics out there on the need for water conservation and when we might run out of water if we don't conserve? And we'll start with Denise, and then we'll let Jennifer weigh in.
Oh, thank you, Bernice. And that is a wonderful question because that's really top of mind for most every consumer. As you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, they see all this water and why should we conserve? But in the state of Texas, again, we use surface water supplies, and we have to have a certain quantity permitted by the state. And as our population grows, we have to meet those demands. And so the cheapest water that we have today is what has already been developed. And it is estimated that over the next 50 years, to meet our water needs, that a quarter of our water supplies are going to come from conservation and efficient use of those supplies that we have today. So the state of Texas and each of the water providers are really tasked with undergoing education campaigns and initiatives to help raise awareness and provide consumers with tips and things to do that they can best management practices of where can you save water, where can you use water efficiently, water-saving tips that you can implement that hopefully become day-to-day habits. So that it will conserve our water that we have today until we have to, build a new reservoir or look for a new additional supply, which is going to be quite expensive.
Indeed, I can imagine. Do you ever anticipate something, how like with the power company, Denise, they brown us out or they have rolling brownouts? Would y'all ever get to a point where you might bring the water down to a trickle if people are using too much or anything like that?
Well, what you would see was that something similar to what we did during the historic winter event where we had high water demands. And so we asked as a water provider for the citizens to limit their non-essential uses of water so that we could meet the needs for firefighting, water treatment and delivery for our basic human needs, and to ensure that we have a quantity of water that's getting to our hospitals and medical facilities where the water is most critical. So we asked them to, don't run your irrigation system when it's not needed and it's raining. During the winter months when your grass is dormant, turn your irrigation system off and wait till the growing season, and then check to see if you actually need to water or add supplemental water based on the amount of rainfall you have. So there's a lot of different tips that you will have that we ask residents to, reduce their non-essential water use. And that's critical in a drought period when we have no rainfall and our water supplies are diminishing.
I recall you saying that during our Snowmageddon or Ice-mageddon that you saw increased water use.
We did, and that was very interesting. And while we can't really put a finger on it, we can say that it was probably a multiple of things. Individuals were at home. Families were gathering where there was electricity and there was water. So you'd have a larger increase of water within individual homes or different service areas. And of course, one of the main thing is it was asked to let your faucets drip so that it doesn't break. The EPA estimates that a small drip or leak can waste up to 3,000 gallons a year. We deliver water to over 1.8 million people. A typical household would have a kitchen, possibly 2 bathrooms. So you're going to drip in the kitchen, you're going to drip both the sinks and probably both bathtubs. And so that collectively is a lot of water saved that we can then deliver for those critical needs of firefighting, our medical facilities, and just our basic human necessities.
Indeed, that's a lot of faucets dripping. I had all mine dripping except one, and the one that didn't drip is the one that bursted. But could there ever be a point when there's just no water? We're in a very high drought period. What happens?
I don't think that we'll see the time when there is no water, or hopefully no gap in the tap, as we call it.
Yeah.
Individuals will just have to learn to use water differently. It is a limited resource. And so we have to start treating it as a limited resource and using it wisely and efficiently.
I think some of us had that opportunity, though, again, a few weeks ago with busted pipes. I did.
Oh, and
I learned to conserve water because I didn't have a lot, and I was having to fill up my tub from my next-door neighbor's water hose.
And I agree with that. I think a lot of times your consumers or your users of a natural resource don't appreciate or value or realize its value until you're in the corner and you don't have it to use, such as electricity and or water during that winter storm. And then you really start to appreciate it. The problem is when those instances or events are gone, we lose that in our mind until the next event occurs. And so what we are tasked with in the water industry is having that top of mind through education, programs such as yours, through the clean water, programs that they have to keep that top of mind so that it becomes a day-to-day behavior.
Indeed. And now is a good time, since many of us in North Texas just experienced the phenomena of being without water. Thank you so much. We want to move now to talk more about reclaimed water. So tell us, I want to start with you, Denise, because I know you all do a lot of this at the Water District. What is recycling, reuse, and I've heard the term regeneration, but certainly reclamation of our water? Tell our listeners exactly what this is and how this is commonly accomplished, why it's necessary, and what are the various methods of reusing or recycling our water.
Okay, so for reclamation, that is actually cleaning up the water itself. So the water that we use in our homes, which is called treated water, has its own piping system. We get it in our home, we wash our hands, we wash our hair, we wash our clothes, we wash our dishes. And once it's been used, it's considered wastewater, and it goes in a different piping system, which is more commonly rephrased as a sewer system, where it then is collected and then travels to a wastewater treatment plant. And we want to remove all of those unwanted particulates that have gone into the sewer system because that water needs to be cleaned enough to put back into the environment, into a local creek or stream. So it undergoes reclamation or purification to remove all of those unwanted particulates. And in the wastewater, we actually do use chlorine as a disinfectant and ultraviolet lights to help remove all of those particulates. And we're very under very strict guidelines because we cannot have any harm go into that receiving stream. Since we do know the quantity of wastewater that comes into our sewer plants or our wastewater plants, we know how much is being discharged into that receiving creek or stream. You can either have direct reuse of water or indirect reuse. And the North Texas Municipal Water District, as I mentioned earlier, has constructed a man-made wetland where we can then recapture about 70% of the water that's been discharged from our wastewater plants. We pump that into our man-made wetlands where those aquatic plants, as we mentioned, the particulates that Jennifer had mentioned earlier, those nutrients, those unwanted heavy metals, they are then removed through the plants, cleansed, the water is cleansed naturally, and then we can pump that back up to Lavon to augment our treated water supplies.
What's on the horizon as it relates to reclamation of water? Are there any promising technologies for the future with that?
Sure. I think the technologies are there. That really, we have a lot of great treatment techniques for purifying water. I think it's really the policy that lags behind and the public perception. So we need to explain to the public what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we have the technology to treat water, wastewater, and put it directly back into the drinking water pipe. Right now, what tends to happen is you put the water back into a reservoir so it's diluted. But in fact, it'd probably be cheaper and easier just to put it back in the drinking water pipe. But the public may not be ready for that yet.
What kind of policy work is Clean Water Action doing as it relates to recycling and reuse?
We do a lot of work around emerging contaminants. So are there any contaminants in the wastewater that we're not testing for or they may not be removed by our current treatment? It's very unlikely because of the level of treatment, but it's just something you always need to keep an eye on so you can assure the public that their water is safe.
Thank you, Jennifer. Last word, Denise.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Jennifer. I think it's also important to remind our consumers that any of those constituents or lingering, issues, as technology is developed to treat in water treatment or wastewater treatment, the water providers have to follow those new treatment policies. We are guided by the EPA and state regulation. So we are always enhancing our treatment processes for water and wastewater as that technology is developed to ensure a healthy, clean supply of drinking water, potable water, or the water that has been used as we clean it to go back into the environment.
Indeed, because that is a public concern. Thank you so much, both of you all ladies. You have made us just smarter today and given us a lot to think about, but I think you have created the impact of this show, and that is to let people know why this is important and why to care about water, groundwater conservation. It's not an option. It is an existential must. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your homes, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of a trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but they all add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening today, and join us again next week for our last show on March's shows on water. Thank you.